In this video, we're going to further talk about the pea shooter and how to potentially model this. First off, there's tons of different ways to model any object in a program like Autodesk Maya. And there's lots of different strategies. And like I say to a lot of people that are modeling something for the first time, you're most likely going to have to model it more than once, or you're going to, you're not going to get it right the first time. You have to kind of try things. So a lot of the stuff I will be showing you is very dependent on my first takes and how I would approach it, and certain tools, but it's by no means the only way of doing something. Now, as I look at this, I think this is a great model to talk about things such certain topics such as of smoothing, as well as smooth preview. So that's how I'm going to approach this model. So let me give you a little background on smooth and smooth previewing before we get started on the details of this particular model. Now, some people would have to come in here and do a sphere, and they wouldn't be wrong. I mean, it's just different. If I come in here and create a sphere and try to position this, I can position this here, and it's pretty much the same shape that it would be correct. Now, it's not the only way. And like I said, I want to talk about smoothing operations here. We could also do this with a square. So if I were to come in here and actually make a square, a cube more precisely, and make a cube, and that's going to draw a cube out. And I like to make it be a perfect cube. So I'm just going to go into the inputs here of the object, get under the channel box, click on the inputs if you don't have them up open. And I'm just going to pick any size. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to hit 8 for this demo. And I have a cube here, and if I were to smooth this, it would actually come out to be a perfect sphere as well. And it will be slightly different. Again, in some cases, this might be what you want, but there's two well, I'm going to call them problems, or two things that polygon spheres tend to do. They tend to have poles, which is these sections right here that end in triangles, and they tend to be a little more dense for the geometry that it takes to make them. But a cube that is smooth twice will be pretty comparable in size. I think it might actually be a couple bigger, but it won't have any poles, and that might be a good thing or a bad thing. But it's just a good start to talk about smooth previewing. So if I come over here and with the object selected and go Mesh, Smooth, you smooth it once, you can see it looks something like that. And if I come up here to Mesh Smooth and hit it again, it'll smooth it again. Or you can hit the G key on your keyboard to repeat your last used tool, in this case smooth. So there you go. And you can see that's only 2 smooth steps. And yes, it's definitely rougher. You can look at it and you can say, oh, that's a lot rougher than this. But it's a lot less geometry. Now, you might not have probably don't have your display HUDs open yet, but if you want to see, and I can show you, and I'll show you how to open in a second, I can look at this display HUD here, and what I'm looking at is the second column right here. The second column is telling me the numbers of what I have selected. The first column is what you have in your scene. The second column is the object that's selected, and the third column here is if you have subcomponents selected, what subcomponents you have selected. So it is saying this sphere is 760 tries. This sphere is 192 tries. And if you're working from a video game industry platform, you generally want to keep your polygon count down. That is getting definitely a looser and looser as technology improves, but you still want to be mindful of it all the same. How do you get this display HUD up? If you are curious about this as well, is you go to Display, Heads Up Display, Poly Count. That's a toggle that you can turn on and off. And it'll show you. I'll leave it on. You can see that it shows you your verts, edges, faces, tris, and UVs of your scene. Whatever object you've selected, I have nothing selected. There you go, object selected. And then again, if I select a subcomponent mode, it's like top half, for example, the third column is whatever you have selected. All right. So the important thing here I'm trying to get across is that you can actually take cubes and smooth them and get pretty good results. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because it's going to be way easier to model from a base, from a box or a cube, than it is to model from a sphere. And that's just my personal preference. Again, there are cases where I may start out with a sphere, but a lot of times, for a lot of things I do, I generally start with a cube. So I'm just trying to point out that you can smooth out something from a cube to round as a sphere is pretty well. So what would we do? Well, I would go back to making this a cube. So maybe I'll go ahead and put a cube in here. And I'll just go and make it 8 again. And this presents a dilemma. Do we have to smooth it to know what it is? I don't know how round this is going to be before I get started. I don't know. I have to smooth it to find out, and then I have to undo, and that's not practical, obviously. So in Maya, you have built-in smooth previewing functions, which are bound to the 1, 2, and 3 keys. And by default, you should be on the 1 key. And this is per object, meaning, I'm just going to duplicate this. If I select one of these objects here, hit the 1 key, it goes down to the default 1, no smoothing. At the 2 key, however, you can see that the object is smooth previewed, showing you what the object will look like smooth, 2 levels of smooth operations on it, with a wire cage box or cube around the whole thing. So that's a 2 key. 1 key is its normal mode, 2 is its smooth preview mode. 1, 2, 1, 2. 3 shows you the smooth preview, but without the wireframe cage. It looks just like that. Again, why do we do this? If I were to take this other object that I duplicated and actually smooth this, you can see I have this here. And if I want to, let's say, make this more oblonged, like make an oblong shape, I'm just going to duplicate it again for copies. I can grab this single face, and again, I'm toggling back and forth between the 1 and 3 key here, in my case. I can make it more oblonged by just doing, moving a face. Or maybe come over here and I can scale this one by hitting the R key and scaling this one. Make like something more rounded. That's a lot harder to do with more faces. It can be done. And we can talk about soft mod selection tools as well. We're going to talk about them. It can be done, but it's generally a little more difficult. So what the benefit of smooth preview does is it allows you to work with less geometry, but preview what the shape looks like rounded. And as you can see, as I go back to the 1, you wouldn't expect this to look anything like this. And that, again, all the difference between 2 and 3 is you get to see the wireframe cage. So that lets you preview those and see those things and adjust them accordingly. So the advantage of smooth preview allows you to manipulate less geometry, make bigger changes, which are best for organic stuff and rounded things, actually, with less geometry having to be moved to get those results. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go ahead and tap the 3 key. I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit larger. And the great advantage about having an image plane, again, is if we tap the 4 key, i.e. go to wireframe, the image plane doesn't go to wireframe, which that's good. That's a good thing, because then we can see the image plane a little bit more in conjunction with this thing here. So there we go. We have the sphere here. And I'm just going to stop there for that, because obviously this is this mouth nozzle thing, whatever you want to call this, the pea shooter nozzle here is going to be the most complicated part of this. But I kind of want to talk about a few other things before I get to this. So there we go. That's a brief introduction on smooth previewing, how to be mindful of your geometry, and from the get-go, because it's always easier to manipulate things with less geometry, regardless of your poly count. If you're working what's called a low to high poly count, which we're doing in this lecture, you want to be mindful of your geometry as you go, because it'll be easier to manage. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the stem here, that's really easy. It's just a cylinder. But again, let's be mindful of our geometry. So if I come in here, for the sake of this, I'm just going to make sure I build this at the origin. So I'm going to tap the 4 key in this top view. And I'm going to move this to be at the origin. And if I have to move my image plane, maybe I'll go move my image plane. But I'm going to move this sphere to be there. And yeah, I probably will have to move my image plane. And all I did to move this like this is I held down the X key while I was on translate. And again, the X key is your grid snap function. You can see it highlighting up here. I'm just going to drag this over here. I could have done this later, but I'm going to go ahead and do it now. And then maybe, like I said, maybe I'll correct. This happens a lot for me. Maybe I'll have to correct my image plane. I'm going to turn off my reference, grab this. In this case, I'm going to match my, technically, I don't know, the stem's there. So maybe I won't mess with my image plane. Maybe I'll leave that alone, actually. I'll worry about that later. But I will keep my sphere at the center for right now. All right, so let's go ahead and work on this stem part here. Now, again, I can think of 3 different ways of doing this stem. Obviously, it's a cylinder, but we can use something called soft selection to manipulate this. We could use a extrude along a curve to do this. We could use a bend deformer to do this. There's probably other ways. I can think of 3 different ways to do this, but in this particular case, I think I'm going to go with the soft selection. So I'm going to go ahead and block out a low polygon cylinder first. Then I'm going to add some divisions to it, and then I'm going to talk about soft selection. So it's important to do this to kind of think yourself through, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, I've been doing this for this one, so I think about those things. And sometimes when I do something brand new, I don't have it. I make mistakes, and that's just that you always have to go back and kind of learn. You have to always do things a couple times to get it correct. So I'm going to go ahead and go to cylinder, make a base cylinder here. I'm just going to drag this up for now. I'm just eyeballing it, looking at it, and I'm like, oh my god, that's way too thick. So maybe what I'll do is I will come over here into the inputs, and again, I'm just guessing. And I'm going to tone down the radius. Again, you can type the numbers here, or if you want to, you can click on the word, bring your mouse into the main window, middle mouse click and hold, and drag this left or right to manipulate that size. This is a more interactive way of doing it, so you don't have to be so precise. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is just, again, to be mindful, is this is a lot of geometry. I mean, it doesn't look like it's a lot of geometry, but I mean, we don't need this many polygons. We can actually probably bring this down a lot further. I could probably do this on like 12, and you probably won't even notice a difference, other than the fact that you'll see facets when Maya first does this. This is something called hardened edges on normals, where before it was softened. Now, I'm not sure why it defaults to the hard edges when you start changing the values there. It's probably a setting somewhere I can go change, but it's not worth our time. What I can do is I reduce the poly count, but I can re-soften those normals to make it look more round. It's a trick of the light. This is, something, one of the big breakthroughs in 3D graphics that allowed really 3D graphics to get into a more modern space back in the day. So what we can do is we can select these edges, or we can just do the whole thing, but I'm going to select these edges because that's the correct way of doing it in this case. Select these edges, and again, just go into to go in subcoordinate mode. You right click and hold, go to edge, drag a box, select those edges, and you come up to mesh display, soften edges. This is what it was on before. For whatever reason, it gets changed when I changed that setting. So soften edges. You can see, go back to object mode, and you can see that's pretty much looks the same. So again, it's a lot less polygons for a lot less, looks just as round. Now, I could come in here and add them through the cylinder, but just to reinforce our other tools that we've talked about in the past, I'm going to use the because I want to get some geometry vertically here. I'm going to go ahead and use the Multicut tool to do that, just to kind of reinforce these tools as you go. And again, like I said, there's lots of ways of doing things. So the quick key for Multicut tool is Control-Shift-X, or you go up to the mesh, into the mesh tools, Multicut. Again, I'm going to use Control-Shift-X, and you'll see it turn into a little crosshair, and it'll allow you to immediately start drawing on things and make cuts. Now, I'm not going to use, remember, the Multicut tool gets its name because you can do cuts lots of different ways. I'm actually going to do one of the options of this, is once you're in the tool, you hold down Control, and it'll let you cut in rings. So maybe what I'll do is I'll hold on Control, and I could come in here and make cuts. But yep, one more quick key for you. If you hold down Shift also, so I'm holding down Control and Shift, it'll snap into increments. And I really should be looking at my my side view when I'm doing this, or my front view. There we go. So there we go. Control and Shift. Yeah, I'm just going to eyeball it, but holding down Shift lets it snap. I think to 10% increments is the default. So this looks about 50%. Let me go do here. I'm going to do here, and I'm just holding down Control and Shift. And again, this is a persistent tool. You know, it'll keep doing it until I decide to exit the tool by selecting a different one. And to exit it, I'm just going to hit the W key. So again, Control Shift X activates Multicut tool. Control allows you to do loops or rings, which is how I did a circular one around the cylinder. And then Shift was on top of that was to lock it into percentage increments. So the Multicut tool is very valuable. If you have a hard time with that, refer back to the tool series where we talk about the Multicut tool in great detail. All right, so now that we have this, you know, we reduced the geometry vertically, but we extended the rings, you know, so we have more, you know, loops that way. We can manipulate this. And again, I said, like, there's 3 different ways of doing this. The way I'm going to show you is using moving tools and rotating, using soft select modifications on there. So how soft select works is, if you were to normally do this, if I grab something, for example, I just double click that loop and move it, it's a 1-to-1 relation. If I turn on soft select, which is the B key, the Bravo key, it will turn on this, what I describe as a heat map, soft select. A lot of times the default settings, however, will be massive. They'll be like way big, so the thing might just turn just pure yellow. So that can be a problem. So if you see the heat map, you're fine. Or if you see this massive yellow, you might have to zoom out, which again, you can see I zoomed up pretty far. You might not be able to see the edges of the heat map. So how you change the size of this soft select, again, if you see solid yellow, is hold down the B key, hold down the Bravo key, and left mouse click and hold and drag left in this screen. Left makes the brush size smaller, right makes the brush size bigger. This is true for, there's several other brush and sculpting functions in Maya. They're all the exact same. Holding down the B key generally will let you make the brush size bigger or smaller. So again, holding down the Bravo key makes it bigger or smaller while moving, like I said, I'm left clicking on the mouse, dragging left and right. Tapping the Bravo key, B key, turns it on and off. So what does this do? This heat map, what it does is whatever is selected, which again, just to reiterate, I selected that edge, that's still one-to-one. Whenever I grab the move tool, it's 1-to-1. And again, with the soft select off, it does this. It's normal. With the soft select on, you get the heat map, and I'm just guessing numbers here. I'm not exactly sure what they are, but let's just say as it gets to the orange, it's 50%. As it gets to the black, it's 25%. And as it gets to the blue, obviously, it's not being affected at all. So what you get is you get a staggered movement. So again, as one part I grab, it's 1-to-1. I'm just guessing 50, 25, or whatever. And you kind of have to feel it out. So again, I'm looking at this, I'm like, I need it bigger. So maybe I'm going to hold on the B key, drag this to the right, and I'm going to go ahead and move this around. And you can see it's a little more mushy. Technical word there, it's mushy. So you can see it looks like I'm grabbing the wrong direction. So undo that, go to my reference view here. I'm just tapping the spacebar again to move around these views. That's all it is, spacebar tapping. And I'm going to go to this view, and I'm going to drag this like this. Maybe I'll drag this one, why not? Down a little bit. And maybe I'll drag, and you can use this for anything. You can use this for scale, as well as rotation as well. So maybe I'll rotate these ones. And again, holding down the B key lets you change the size of the fall off of the brush. All right, so you can see I moved that around, and I have that rough shape there. And again, if you want to less, sometimes, you know, like I said, turn it on and off as needed. So there's the soft select. This is it's a great way of doing a lot of organic block in shapes. It's by any means not the only way. It's a great way to block in a lot of things, as you can see. Now I'm going to talk about one last little tool tip here that's really nice, that's not well known, and then we'll wrap this video up. Is let's say once you start getting things bent and interesting like this, let's say overall the thickness is too much or not enough. You can't really come in here and scale this without, you know, kind of distorting it in one angle. So I mean, I want it to be thicker. Then this would work, but then I have to reposition everything. So I mean, I can get it thinner, but it doesn't quite work, especially after you start deforming and switching things around. It doesn't work the same. Can't really get it there. So let's say overall this is too, I mean, mine, I think it's fine, but let's just say it's too thick or too thin, and I want to actually keep the geometry kind of relative to where it's at, but I just want to make the whole thing thicker or thinner. The way to do this, the trick to do this, is you actually go to the Move tool. And what you're on is right now is the Move World setting function. So if I grab it and I move it, it moves in the world view. I don't want that. That's great for most of the time, but not for what we're trying to do right here. Like I said, this little trick, what we're going to do instead is we're going to select all the vertices, everything. So I just went into some vertex mode, selected everything, make sure, yep, got everything. All right. And then I'm going to go into the Move tool settings, which the tool settings are this little icon right here. It's the fourth one from the left. It's the little hammer with the, right here, that one. The tool settings by default for the move are set to world, which again, that's if you grab it and move it inside the scene. What we're going to do is we're going to change this to be, click on this little downward pointing arrow, change this to normal. And I'm going to change that to normal. And I'm going to come over here. And I'm going to grab the little N, which again, if you remember extruding along the normal is the blue arrow, or just most of the time you want the normal. You're going to grab the little N right here, and you're going to drag back and forth, and you can make this thicker or thinner, and it tries to keep it pretty close to relatively all the same shape. So this is a little trick to pick up, a great one if you ever need to do that. You need to make things a little bit thinner or thicker overall. And again, all you do is go into the move settings, you change it from world to normal, and you're just moving all the vertices on the end, which is the normal. Be sure when you're done with this, though, you reset the tool, because you don't want that to be your saved setting. So reset the tool, back to world, and I'm going to close the tool settings. So in this video, we covered a lot of topics. Like I said, we talked about smooth previewing in general. We talked about the soft selection, and we talked about moving things in world versus normal space for different results. So in the next video, we're gonna dive a little bit deeper in on the smooth preview and how to make perhaps this pea shooter's mouth and different ways of accomplishing that particular part of the model.